Hello everyone, NadLabs here. Today we're going to be learning how to make a very simple joystick in Godot 4, and the reason I'm making this is because I have a video about this in Godot 3, but it's kind of outdated and I want to do a new one. On top, I want to do a new one with new methods, so that's the reason we're going to be doing that. And on top of that, you can see we have a hand cam, so you can see what I'm pressing. So, of course, I'm always going to start with making a simple world node, and I'm going to put that into my source folder, and the source folder is basically there just to, organize my code. So I have this world, and what do I want? I need, well, two things. I need a player, and I need a way for the player to move. So I need a joystick. And I'm going to make the joystick first, then the player. So to make a joystick, I'm just going to have a joystick node, and I'm going to demonstrate this on mobile too. I have my little mobile phone handy and ready to go. So that's cool. So for a joystick, if you think about it, if you have a mobile phone, and you have like this area over here that has a joystick, there's a center for the joystick, and then there's like the part that you move. If I have a joystick like this, the way you use it is you grab the center and you kind of move it from that center. So this actually requires you to keep in mind where the center is and then have that like distance measurement. So when we make our joystick, we are literally going to be measuring the distance or the difference from the center of the joystick or that object or that node, and we're going to be minusing or subtracting that from the joystick part that we grab. And this is going to be determined by a touch input, right? Because you grab it with your finger. So we're going to be determining that location, subtracting, and that gives us a direction. And also, if we think about it, it gives us a magnitude as well. So we can actually measure the distance or the size of this, and we can use that to determine how fast we should be going if we want to do that. And there's a lot of factors and aspects on this that you can kind of expand on, such as, how big do you want your joystick to be? Do you want it to be a circle? Do you want it to be a square? You can make clamping, and I have in my first tutorial, there's a section on clamping. Or do you want your joystick to have some factor where it is always no matter how far you take it, the more affects your player. So, you might want that for some reason. Or do you want it to always have a constant effect such that it's only like a direction joystick, not a speed joystick? Up to you. There's a lot of customization. But with that being said, we can always just hop straight back into Godot and actually build it. So if I go back to my paint drawing for a second, we need to make the centerpiece. So that centerpiece is just going to be this node 2D. And then for this piece that we grabbed, this white circle up here, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using a marker 2D. In Godot 3, if you're still using or still coming from Godot 3 land, position 2D is what it used to be called. Now it's called marker 2D, just for the curious few. But if you're in 4.3 stable or anything above, you can't actually see that it says 4.3 stable, but you can see over here we're in 4.3 stable. And I'm going to bring this back down. And because we're in 4.3 stable, now we have to use this marker 2D, which is totally fine. It's the same idea. Just gives you a position, nothing else. And we're going to add to that a sprite 2D, which is just going to help us figure out where exactly our marker 2D is. So if I move my marker 2D to the right, you can see that I have like a little red and green line over here. Hopefully that shows up. Maybe it shows up in 2K. I'm not sure. But I'm just going to go over here and to my sprite, and I'm going to drag icon.svg and get jump scared by Godot. But the idea is, if I move this marker 2D, I kind of have an idea of where exactly my joystick grabbable bit is relative to the joystick in the center. If that wasn't clear, I have a circle that I can grab, and I will have a reference to that distance from the center. So what does this mean? Well, if you think about it, now if we just take the sprite, or if we go over here to our joystick node, parent node, and we just add another sprite, so I'm going to click create. What you can see over here, and I added by clicking Control A, that's the shortcut. What you can see over here is I can add another sprite, which is going to drag it, and now we have that kind of a difference. However, I'm going to make this smaller, so I'm going to do Shift Alt to, kind of make it the same size. And I'm going to just make that a bit smaller, and in the meantime, I'm going to modulate the color just a bit to like some pinkish color, reddish color. And so just so we know which one's forward and back, or the part that we move in versus the part that we that's the back of our joystick, so to speak. However, you can see that when I bring it over, it goes underneath. That's because of how Godot renders. It renders from top to bottom. So it goes render, render, render. So it renders, and then it renders this on top. However, if you want to change that, just bring this to the back. And now you can see our joystick works perfectly fine. So the scene is set up. Now we just have to actually make it work. Give us the values and whatnot. So I'm going to Control S, save the scene. I'm going to save it under joystick, and joystick save. And now I'm going to go back to my world. I'm going to go up here to world link, and I'm going to go joystick. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my joystick down here a bit to the center of the screen. And I'm going to go back to my joystick scene. I'm going to click create script, and I'm going to just zoom in a bunch. Oh, not like that. What do I want to do with this paint session? Well, I want to get a reference or some sort of signal, or not signal, but I want to get a variable that tells me the difference between them. So that's not that hard. So that we're just gonna call that direction, because it really is just a direction, or let's call it difference, right? So difference because it is a difference between 2 points, and we can see over here that this is a variable called difference. I'm setting it to type vector2, and vector2, and the value I'm giving it is vector2.0. In fancy pants term, that means I'm making a variable, I'm giving it a type of variable, so I'm kind of categorizing it, and I'm going to give it a value, so like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if I go over here to my function process, physics process, that happens every frame. However, I just thought about it, and I think it would be better to do an input function, because that happens every input event, which is separate from the physics processing. So when we do it through the input event, we can actually do it much more precisely, because it happens when the input event happens, not when the game updates every frame, which are 2 independent streams. Now, if I go over here to my input function, you can see it's screaming because I have an expected indented block after function declaration. Fancy way of saying I need some code after, you type some function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the most logical thing, that if our input, not internal event, if input.is action press. So while I'm pressing my joystick, if I'm click, then I'm going to set the difference variable equal to the marker. So I'm going to do $marker.2d.global position minus the global position. And what is this global position referring to? Well, this is actually referring to self.global position. When people never write self, because why would you write self? That's kind of redundant, because you just want to grab the global position of the object that the script is on. That's what self refers to. It refers to the object that we're on. So self over here refers to this joystick node over here, and that refers to where this is in the world. So that global position that you see over here, self.global position, that is the global position relative to this origin node over here, that where the red, green, purple, and blue aquish line intersect. That is where the joystick base is, so to speak. And then a marker2d.global position is just where the marker is. So technically, if I do this, save my scene, go back, if we take a snapshot of this and go into Paint, I'm not going to cut this out. Oops, okay. If I go over here into Paint, and what I really just did through code is I said, okay, Godot, grab a reference to where this is, grab a reference to where this is, make sure you can subtract. So you're going to subtract, and you're going to find me this purple line. Once you get me that purple line, I want to do something with this purple line. What is it? Well, we could print out the purple line. So print diff. We can print out the difference. That is not a problem. And I'm clicked F5 to run. So if I just select the current scene, that would work, because I'm on the world scene over here, up there. And now it's running. Takes a second. First run. Okay, so we're getting a bunch of issues. So debugger is going crazy. Input map click does not exist. That's true. We did not define click. So how do I fix this? It's actually saying you did not define this click. What is click? Well, if I go to my project settings over here, input map, I have to add an action called click, and then I have to set the action. So over here, I'm going to set it, and mouse buttons, left mouse button, all devices. So when I click, and this works for mobile too, and the way I know it works for mobile is because when I go over here to general, and if I click, if I type in emulate, you can see that emulate mouse from touch is on, which means emulate a mouse position, so a left mouse button from a first click. So when you touch a screen, let's say this is a screen over here, when I press, that is emulating a mouse touch, and that's on by default in Godot 4, and that means we can use it on mobile. Okay, cool. So now that I have this, I should click F5 to run. Everything should be fine, and nothing is happening. Why is nothing happening? Well, we can see we're printing out stuff, so is action process working? However, if you take a second to pause and think, why isn't my joystick working? It's because we aren't actually moving the joystick, if you think about it. So how do I move the joystick? Well, what you would want to do is you'd want to do marker.global position. So we're actually setting the position of this red guy, and we're going to set it equal to get_global mouse position. So wherever this mouse is on the game, you want to get that position. So if I control S to save, you can see it starts to work, and now we're getting values over here because we're getting that difference, and we are able to get the direction. So if I wanted to get the direction, all I would have to do is I'd have to print out diff.normalized. And why do I have to do normalized? What is normalized? It kind of sounds scary. Well, normalized, if you read the documentation, returns the result of scaling the vector to unit length. That sounds super scary, but it's a very simple way of saying just make the length 1. So if we go back to Paint over here, instead of having this purple line and having this very big number, if we calculate the length, and how do you calculate the length? You literally calculate the length using Pythagorean's theorem. If you don't know Pythagorean's theorem, I suggest you pay attention to grade 8 math, because I believe they teach it in grade 8 or level 8. I'm not sure what school or country you're in, but Pythagorean's theorem is literally calculating this x distance and this y distance, which is very simple. It's just the length, and then you take the squares of both sides and then you square root it to get this purple line. I don't need to explain that, but normalize basically says, instead of getting this long value, just make the length of this 1, and then you can work out how big these smaller aspects should be. So this length should be 1. Okay, that blue is a bad color there. This length should be 1 over here, and then you have to adjust the x and y components to be a similar, or they have to be to the length to make that resultant 1. It's very simple. It sounds complicated, but just think of it as giving you the value, or sorry, think of it as giving you the direction instead of the value. Cool. That's settled. And if we run the scene now, we can see that we get a difference and a direction. So this fancy, these fancy decimals actually tell me the direction without the distance of that value or of this vector, which is useful in some cases, as I mentioned earlier. So now that we have our joystick working, this is all we need to get the joystick working. We have to make our player. So if I go over here to making a new scene, I can click add other node. So we can add a character body 2D, and we can add a sprite. Cool. Why do I want to do that? Because I just want to see something move across my screen. So I'm going to add this to the scene. I'm going to add this icon.svg to the scene. I'm going to rename this to player, and I'm going to make a new folder for that. So player folder over here. And you can see over here my file tree is expanding. And I'm going to make a script for this. And in my script, I'm basically going to say, oh, well, if you think about it, my script needs to have access to that difference or direction variable. How do I get access to it? Well, this is where I'm going to introduce, probably for the first time ever on my channel, the idea of autoloads. And autoloads are basically a script that is like a global variable. Now, why do you want to do a global variable? Well, it's very simple. Imagine if you have this value over here, this purple or yellow value, whichever one, and you want to use it across like multiple different factors in your game. And you want to, like, I don't know, you have an enemy here, you have an enemy here, you have like, I don't know, some speed meter here, and they all want access to this value. What you could do is you could give it to this, you could give it to this, you could give it to this, but what's easier is to just give it to a file that's kind of off this, like the main game, and this file will always have its value updated, and then all of these guys and gals over here will go to this file and kind of just read that value. This is way easier. Even though there's more lines, it's way easier because that way we only have to update. Oops, black is a horrible color to use here. We only have to just do this updating process. Okay, let's use green. I only have to do this updating process once instead of keeping track of 3 different updates, you know? I only have to update once, and then whoever wants to read it can read it. It's a very common pattern, and I'll put a link in the description if I remember. In fact, I'm going to write it down here right now. Okay. Put auto load helper in description plus old video. Okay, I'm gonna remember to put that stuff in the description if you would like for further information on autoloads. So I'm just gonna go ahead and make one, and if you don't understand the theory fully, you can find out more resources over here. Anyways, what we're going to be doing is we're going to make that autoload. So we have a joystick folder here, we have a player folder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this autoloads. And in autoloads, I'm going to make a new script over here. I'm going to call it global. And in global, I'm going to go to project settings, and I'm going to actually go to global. So maybe this will get confusing for some people. So I'm going to name it something silly. Rename. I'm going to call it silly.gd. And silly.gd is going to give me the access to like these global variables. So I'm going to go to project settings, globals, and I'm going to add source autoload silly.gd, add. Now silly.gd is in my autoload. So silly.gd right now is acting as this file over here. Whoa, paint just lagged. Okay, it's still kind of lagging. Weird. That's weird. Autoload. So now I have an autoload. What am I gonna do? Well, I'm going to go open up silly.gd, and I'm going to name a variable called var distance, or let's do direction from joystick. Direction from joystick, and I'm going to name it, or I'm going to give it a value of vector2.0. Okay, cool. So in my joystick code, in this joystick.gd, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to type in silly. As you can see, silly popped up, silly dot, And if you can see, it already has a parameter or a variable here called direction from joystick. I'm just going to make it equal to difference.normalized. And what this means is now I have effectively sent an update to silly.gd from my joystick to say, hey, I want this value updated. Now, why does this matter? Like we said earlier, now this player over here can easily get access to silly.gd. So in my physics process function, which happens every frame of the game, I'm going to tell my player, hey, player, go to silly.gd, and get the direction from joystick. And what do I want you to do with that? Well, I want you to set the velocity that you have equal to silly.direction from joystick, and then I want you to move and slide. If I run the scene, what you'll see is nothing happens. Why? Because if we go to our world, because we clicked F5 to run the scene or the main scene, there's no player. So I'm going to go over here to world and I'm going to add player. Add player is added. Now you can see that if I move the joystick, you may not be able to see it, but this guy is moving very, very slowly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this and I'm going to multiply the silly.direction. So direction, remember, it doesn't have that magnitude. It doesn't have that factor of how big the speed should be. It just has the direction you should go in. It doesn't tell you how fast you should go in that direction. So here we're just going to multiply by 10. And if I save the scene, you can see we're moving and we have our joystick. So if you want to make it so that the joystick has a speed factor, so how far you push the joystick equals how fast something should go, then instead of giving it the difference.normalize, what you could just do is give it the difference, because there you're giving it the direction and the speed. However, you should be forewarned that the length at which you bring your joystick, or the length at which this guy is from the joystick, really, really matters now. So you can see over here, if I move it a little bit out there, oh, okay, it's kind of tame, but you can see I have to bring it like really far to make it start moving. If it's close, it again moves really slowly. So you can see over here, I can kind of go out the window too and move it, but we have our joystick up and running. It kind of looks like it's chasing it, but it's not really chasing it because we're giving it the direction and then the magnitude. That's why people or developers often clamp their joystick, because they don't want their players to be like, hey, I can touch the player with the joystick, or the character with the joystick. That doesn't make sense. I'm not going to go over clamping because that's a bit too much. However, you can work on that yourself. Think of it as homework. Anyways, based off of this, I'm going to also run it on Android just to show you that it works. The final thing I want to show off was, if you notice right now in our game, when we move our joystick, it's all cool, but the second I let go of the mouse, as you can see, I'm letting go of the mouse, my guy keeps moving, and that's a big of an issue. So what you can do is, if input, not internal mode, if input dot is action just released click, if I just released a click, so I let go, what do I want to do? Well, if you think about it logically, what you would want to do is you would want to bring the piece that we move back to the center of the joystick. It's not that hard. So what I would say is bring marker.global position equal to the global position of self, or global position of the joystick base. And if I do that now, you can see that visually we have what we want. Joystick is kind of doing its thing, but the difference value up here is not updating. And that actually makes sense if we read our code. Difference has no reason to update when we were let go. So what we have to do is difference is equal to vector2.0. 0. And if we run the scene now, you can see that when I move, all cool, and the second I let go, why does it not move? Or why does it keep going? Well, if you think about it, we also have to update silly. So because silly is in input action pressed, and we also want to do it in released, what we can do is we can just put silly at the end. So no matter what input event we do, silly will always be updated. Now be a little bit warned, if you press a keyboard button, it will also be updated, but that doesn't really matter because silly will only be affected if we click. Anyways, that's just a small warning. If you didn't understand that, that's totally fine. It doesn't really matter right now, but you can see we get what we want. And now I'm going to export and run it to Android. So what I'm going to do for that is, I'm not going to show you how to set up Android exports. What I'm just going to do is export it. So I'm going to add an Android export here. I'm going to fix import, and this should be enough to do remote debug. Okay, cool. Home screen, super cool, totally stock. And I'm going to click run on Pixel 7a. And this is in real time. I'm not going to edit anything out. Hopefully you guys can see. Okay, oops. Okay, now we have Godot. all up and running, and you can see that I can press and I can move. And do you see my fingerprints? No. But you can see I can kind of move, and the second I let go, my person stops moving. Pretty cool stuff indeed. I can bring this closer actually. Oh, almost fell off. Hey, don't go underneath my finger. Okay, cool. And you can see everything is running as it should seem. And of course you can like modify this to fit your game, but I'm just showing you the basics on how you would actually show that joystick. Now, that is the complete tutorial. I have nothing else to say except there are a lot of extensions you can do. You could add clamping, you could add dampening. There's a lot of extensions, but I just want to show the basics. And hopefully if you're a beginner watching this tutorial, or if you're a seasoned veteran, you probably learned something. If not, then thank you so much for watching and have an amazing day. And what I'm going to do is going to